before I give it to you, Mr. Moderator,
Yeah.
allow me to make the introductions.
Thank you. That's what I was getting to. Thank you.
Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, all of you, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, which is a partnership between AAK, that's the Architectural Association of Kenya, and NCIA, the Nairobi Centre for International Arbitration. The title for our webinar today is Effective Dispute Resolution in the Construction Sector, and we are hoping to be done by 4 this afternoon. So as part of the program, we'll start off with opening remarks from Mr. Lawrence Murure, who's the CEO and Registrar of NCIA, and he'll also run us through the opportunities that exist for construction experts in dispute resolution. Then thereafter, we'll have an overview of the Joint Building and Construction Council, that's a Jbcc contracts on dispute resolution, which will be presented to us by Mr. Mwai Madenge. Then following Mr. Madenge, we'll have Dr. Isabella Njeri Towi, who will run us through the current trends and nature of disputes in the construction sector. Then hopefully at around 3:20, we'll have a session featuring the features of adjudication as a means of resolving construction disputes, which will be run by Mr. Paul Karakesi. And then thereafter, we'll have a Q&A and maybe comments that members or participants may have. So before we start, allow me to introduce our speakers for today. I'll start off with our first speaker. That's Mr. Lawrence Murure Ngugi. Mr. Ngugi is a registrar and also the board secretary of NCIA. And as the CEO, he leads the secretariat of the center. He is an arbitrator and accredited mediator. He's a member of the International Council of Commercial Arbitration, that's ICCA. He's also a member of the Kenya representative to the UNICITRO Working Group 2, Arbitration and Conciliation. He was involved in the discussion which culminated in the Convention on Transparency in the Investor-State Arbitration, and also UNICITRO Working Group 3, Online Dispute Resolution, among many others. Our second speaker is Mr. Mwai Madenge. Mr. Madenge is a registered QS with the Board of Registration for Architects and Quantity Surveyors. He's also a corporate member of the Architectural Association of Kenya, QS chapter, and he was its representative in JBC from 1994 to 1998. He has served as a member of the Governing Council of the chapter from 1994 up to date, and he's also been a corporate member of the Institute of Quantity Surveyors of Kenya since 1995. He has as an active member, he's been the vice chairman. In 2001, he was the JBC representative between 1997 and 2004, and he's also been involved in the comprehensive review of the standard method of measurements for building works in East Africa since 1998. Currently, he's a chief dispute resolution consultant at Billiken Associates. Our other speaker is Dr. Isabella Njeri Towi. Dr. Towi is the chairman and senior lecturer in the Department of Real Estate, Construction Management, and Quantity Surveying at the University of Nairobi. She's a distinguished and recognized leader in academia for training and quantity surveyors and construction managers at undergraduate and postgraduate levels. She has served as an external examiner in various universities in the continent. Dr. Towi is also a member of quantity surveying, construction management, and arbitration professions, and has served diligently as the Borax professional examiner, as a board member in various state agencies, including the NCA, this is the National Construction Authority, and professional bodies such as IQSK. She's a practicing fellow, arbitrator, and also expert witness. She's an expert in developing curricula for programs of quantity surveying and construction management, both regionally and globally, and has successfully overseen the continuous improvement of the undergraduate and postgraduate curricula of the programs at the University of Nairobi. Mr. Paul Karakesi will be our final speaker. Mr. Karakesi has 30 years experience in engineering, preparation of feasibility studies, design and supervision of construction projects in the region, and has vast experience in management of donor-funded projects, including the World Bank, IDA, EU, and the Africa Development Bank. He has been a project director and contract expert for numerous projects initiated by such clients, including the Ministry of Roads and Public Works in Kenya, Ministry of Economic Planning and Development in Rwanda, Ministry of Works in Lesotho, Ministry of Communication and Works in Tanzania, and Ministry of Transport, Housing and Works in Uganda. He's a registered engineer and affiliate of Engineers Registration Board, Kenya Consulting Engineer, Kenya Chartered Civil Engineer, and Engineering Council in the UK. He's a member of the Institution of Civil Engineers in the UK, and also a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators in the UK. Our moderator today is Mr. Kairo Bashia. Mr. Bashia is a team leader and quality control director at Masterbill Integrated Projects. He holds a BA in Building Economics and from the University of Nairobi, and a Master of Business Administration from United States International University. He's also a graduate of Strathmore Business School Executive Education Program. He's a registered quantity surveyor with Borax and a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. He has published and presented several papers as a resource person in professional forums, and is also an active arbitrator and a mediator. He has over 32 years experience in quantity surveying, cost management, contract administration, arbitration, and project management. He has provided leadership in projects ranging from commercial, institutional, residential, industrial, and mixed development. He's a member of the Association of Architects in Kenya, Institute of Quantity Surveyors in Kenya, and the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Kenya branch. He's a past chairman of AAK and also chairman of Muthaiga Golf Club, where he was also the golf captain. So without further ado, I would like to call upon Mr. Bashia to take up from here. Thank you very much and most welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Wambua. And thank you for that very good CV that you've, my brief resume that you've read. Maybe one of the things that you could also just mention was an oversight. I'm also just the immediate past chairman of the Joint Building and Construction Council, where I was working very closely with, amongst others, Mr. Moi Madenge, for reviewing the Jbcc standard form contract. Others, thank you very much. I think this is a good opportunity for us now to officially kick off the program by inviting Mr. Mururi Ngugi, the CEO of NCIA, to tell us something about the opportunities in the institution. He's got about 20 minutes. I can see already something like 15 minutes late, but I believe we should be able to catch up as we move along. So, Mr. Ngugi, I take this opportunity to welcome you to address this very important gathering. Karibu, Lawrence. And I also request that as people speak, they put on their microphone, their video, so that you can actually see. Karibu, Bwana Ngugi, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bwana Kairo. It is my distinct pleasure, of course, to be included in a panel of such eminent persons that have been described in the introduction. And a delight also to join the fraternity of architects as Nairobi Centre for International Arbitration. We are delighted to be in partnership with a segment we consider to be a key stakeholder in the dispute resolution arena. We, on behalf of the Secretariat and indeed the Board of Directors, express our gratitude to the association, not only for this webinar, but in many other instances where we have collaborated to reach out to our various stakeholders. Now today, obviously, not assuming that everybody is cognizant of the Nairobi Centre for International Arbitration, I may want just to mention a couple of things just to help us all be at the same level. One, to say that we are an ADR services provider with access both to national, or if you like, domestic and international arbitration and ADR market. As a global player, we do offer an array of and variety of services from what we refer to as end-to-end management of cases registered with us. This includes being the first point of contact for disputants as they initiate a dispute process with registration, and then the processes that follow composition of a tribunal, all the way up to the collection of an award. And just to use an illustration which might ring home, often in any construction agreement, there will be a dispute resolution clause. An institution will be selected. Oftentimes in architectural contracts, sometimes we have institutions like the AAK offering what we normally refer to as ad hoc, appointive services, and others. NCIA is a bit distinct in that when included in that list, often it will offer what we call full support administrative services. And what do I mean by this? The parties will not only leave it to NCIA to manage the process of appointment and composition of the tribunal, but they will often also rely on the rules of Nairobi Centre for International Arbitration, whether for arbitration or mediation, to manage the entire process all the way up to, as I have mentioned before, the collection of the award. So we do offer full administrative support to dispute resolution processes. In the same vein, we do also sometimes work in collaboration with ad hoc service providers like AAK, where they still maintain the role of appointing the adjudicator, the arbitrator or mediator, and then such mediator, arbitrator or mediator, once appointed, can also engage the NCIA to offer the administrative support. Herein, we would include services such as managing the communication between the tribunal or the panel and the parties, managing the element of payment of fees, disbursements, and also availing our facility to such a panel for the hearing of the dispute. Despite that, also we do have also an appointive role, as I have mentioned, under the UNCITRAL rules, that's the United Nations Commission for Trade Law, whereby we are selected in a couple of contracts across the globe to appoint arbitrators. Parties also in that structure can select the center as an administrator of the process. And we do have rules that determine how we enter into such an agreement. And of course, the default mode, which is where parties by their own private agreement have selected the NCIA as the dispute resolution institution in their contract. We started this in the year 2015 when we launched our arbitration and mediation rules. In the course of business between then and now, we have grown from the one case in that year, 2016, now heading to the 100 case mark. That may sound small in terms of number, but for those who are familiar with the growth of arbitral institutions, you will be aware that normally, in fact, if we could give an example of the leading institution for investment arbitration, ICSID, it took 10 years to record their first case. Now we are not saying we want to piggyback on them to measure our success, but the reality is that it is still a growing business in our region, in the continent. But there we are heading towards a 100 case mark. In terms of value, we have a better story to tell. We now have a case value of about $7 billion US, a wide array of cases, mediation, adjudication, and arbitration. In the course of these cases being heard and managed by us, awards have been rendered. To our knowledge, we have not heard of any award issued by the center that has been challenged so far. We have also had the privilege of hosting one of the largest mediations in recent times in the country, and there too we have seen success. In terms of the region, if I take the continent of Africa as a region, in the year 2020, we were ranked amongst the top 5 centers on the continent by an independent survey by the SOAS University in the UK that conducted an arbitration survey across the continent. So we presently enjoy that league of premier institutions in the continent being ranked amongst the top 5. We, of course, are then expanding our scope of services, diversifying, including to adjudication. We also have been appointed by statute to handle disputes, for instance, for the Kenya Airports Authority, Kenya Ports Authority, the Kenya Railways, the Kenya Post Bank, the Nairobi Financial International Centre Authority, mainly disputes that are related to, for some of them, damages when parties are using their facilities, and for the Nairobi Financial International Centre Authority, for disputes that emanate from the institutions that are registered to offer financial services within their framework. As you can see, that provides opportunity, therefore, for practitioners, whether in the architectural field, whether in other areas of construction, quantity survey, and the other players in the field, for offering their expertise. It is indeed a pleasure to see that even including this very panel and some of the participants I see, I already have members on our panel who are rendering services of adjudication, arbitration, and mediation. We do have presently 2 panels, one for arbitration and another one for for mediation. Both of them offer 2 segments, international and domestic. So international arbitrators, domestic arbitrators, international mediators, and domestic mediators. We are, as I have said, expanding to adjudication. The process to get onto this panel is very simple. We have made it as easily accessible as it could be. Accessible on our website, www.ncia.or.ke. You could also get into contact with us by reaching out to us. We are located at the Cooperative Bank House on Haile Selassie Avenue, or on the contacts that are provided for on the website. We undertake a rigorous process of evaluating the applications so that you can be assured that those who are on the list are precisely the best in their field. What is the value add for one to be on this panel? One, visibility. Secondly, credibility. And thirdly, access. Visibility here, when parties request for us to appoint an arbitrator, a mediator, or as when we get to adjudication, an adjudicator, we often will rely on this list that is already maintained by the center. So we have visibility of whom we have on the center, on the panel, their qualifications, their expertise, and of course we keep a record also of the cases, kind of cases that they have been handling and can handle. Credibility, by saying that we undertake a rigorous process to empanel a practitioner, that means that we have put a premium on all the members that are listed on our panel, and therefore there is credibility about the professionalism and expertise of those on the panel. Access, it opens up access to you as a practitioner to these areas that I have mentioned, statutory appointments, appointments by private parties, appointments when the default power rests on the center to appoint. And as I've said already, there are members of the association who have already been tracked on cases that are being managed by the center. We, in conclusion, are also growing globally. We have entered into partnership with other colleagues in the region, the Africa Arbitration Academy, Africa Arbitration Association, where we are becoming a focal point for the country in exhibiting the talent that we have as a country. We have also entered into a collaboration with centers on the continent and China through a framework called the China-Africa Joint Arbitration Center. And Nairobi has been designated as and the center itself has been designated as the center for the Eastern Central Africa region. What are the potential areas of practice here? There is a panel that is composed of members recommended by the centers. So Nairobi will recommend members from Kenya and the region, that's Eastern Central Africa, who are then empaneled on the KJAC, the China-Africa Joint Arbitration Center framework. Whenever an arbitration is registered in any one of these centers, the panelists who are considered, these are parties who come from China and the continent. The panelists are considered from that list. So it's a closed list. And so we select members from that list. You can already see visibility and access for opportunities there. And of course, as we are extending Kenya's reach within the region, we are following closely with the initiatives on trade within the region, presently in conversations all the way up to DRC. You saw the recent foray to the Dubai. There will be one very soon to the south, extending all the way to Mozambique. And what we are pending as our value add to these conversations is providing dispute resolution services, which will onboard especially our practitioners here in Kenya, in a region that is, of course, in need of people who have the qualifications and expertise to offer dispute services within the region. So our hope is that even as we engage today, we can discuss ways in which, as a center, we can open up those opportunities for you as an association to participate in our processes and as we grow and expand to the region. So thank you, moderator. I'll look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ngugi, for that very elaborate and yet very articulate explanation as to what NCIA does. I believe there could be some questions from the participants. So far I can see about 30, but maybe I can set the ball rolling by asking you what is the composition of your panel in terms of professions. Are they predominantly lawyers, engineers, architects, QSs? Then I'll open that to a few comments or questions from the participants before we move to the next.
Quite the contrary to the norm that often it is assumed that lawyers will be the majority. Let me start off with nationality. And I can take an example of exactly what I've just handled yesterday. We have a panelist who has an applicant who is based in Pakistan. When I look at the qualifications, it is in construction, a very eminent applicant, if I could say so. So in terms of nationality, already we have about 8 to 10 nationalities, and including now this new applicant. In terms of gender, we are seeing a trend where we also are coming to a 50-50 balance between female practitioners and male practitioners, which is a relevant conversation in the age of diversity in this field. In terms of professions, because that's where your question comes. Yes, although lawyers make about 60% presently of the arbitration panel, the same is not the case for mediation. Mediation has a mixed array of professions. Arbitration is still predominated by lawyers. There's a good number of architects. There's also a good number of quantity surveyors. Yes, there's also a good number of engineers. And something interesting, we are also noting that even amongst the lawyers, of the 60%, probably about 15% of them have an underlying profession. So we are seeing people who are listing, although as lawyers, but they have an underlying profession, for instance, quantity survey, engineering. And so the lawyers also are not just lawyers. They have a primary profession other than law. So we already have a widespread across the panels.
Thank you. That is very well answered. This is now my opportunity to throw it to the participants. We can take one or two comments or questions directed to Mr. Ngugi. If you have questions, or maybe you can type the questions and forward them, they can be answered later. I think that would be better for the sake of speed. Now I can see it is 2:30. We are not doing very, very badly. So now I'd like us to first, I don't know whether you clap, at least we clap for Mr. Ngugi for a very, very elaborate presentation on NCIA. I presume we've done that. Now, this is a good opportunity for me now to invite QS Madenge. QS Madenge to tell us about the overview about the Jbcc standard forms contract. For those of you who may not be aware, Mr. Madenge was also heavily involved in the preparation of the green, what you call the green book, Jbcc green book. So he was extremely useful in giving us insights into how we should be able to look at the clauses that require to be reviewed in what we are now calling the 2020 edition of the Jbcc standard form. Mr. Madenge, with that short introduction, I would like to formally invite you to make a presentation to the participants to this forum. QS Madenge. QS Madenge, let me see whether he's...
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Karibu, QS.
Be on camera.
Yes, we can see you clearly now.
Yes. We've been told I'm Moi Madenge, but to take a cue from the moderator, when Mr. Wambua was introducing me, I only recognized half of me. I didn't hear the other part of me. Just to take a cue from the moderator, I'll add one or two things about myself. I hope this will not cost me anything. But he forgot to tell you that I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. And maybe because I'm not hearing well, you allow me to wear some old-fashioned hearing gadgets, because there is something wrong with... Hello?
They make you look much young. We can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. You should have told me that before. So I was saying I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, and apart from the other credentials that Mr. Wambua mentioned, I have a Bachelor of Laws degree and a Master of Laws degree specializing in construction law and practice, with a very heavy bias on dispute resolution, particularly arbitration, adjudication, and mediation. He also forgot to mention that I'm a founder member of the NCIA. I'm member number 005, and I'm still a member, and that I was very, very active in the formulation and the enactment of the Nairobi Centre for International Arbitration Act of 2013 itself. I was working very closely with Justice of Appeal Cairo and a few others in the LSK ADR committee up to 2013, before that law was enacted. I'm also a practicing arbitrator, adjudicator, mediator, and a project manager. But of course, half of those are now rather just there in terms of credentials. I practice more as an advocate, an arbitrator. That's where I am mainly now. So if I may go to the immediate cause for which I'm here, When I asked Mr. Wambua whether we needed to write anything, because I would not have had the time, he assured me that I was not required to write anything. So he allowed me to come and speak from the top of my head. And he also told me that I was going to deal with the JBC standard form contract, not the Jbcc standard form contract. I believe, Mr. Moderator, there could be a problem in terms of the brief I got, because the Jbcc standard form contract, being not in the market, when Mr. Wambua told me JBC, I took it to mean I'll be dealing with the old green book, the agreement and conditions of contract of building works by the Joint Building Council, the one that was there before the new Jbcc. Maybe I should clarify, I should get that clarification from the moderator, because I wasn't going to deal at any great length with Jbcc. I was only going to mention it because it wasn't part of what I understood to be part of my duty today. Can you please
thank you, Moi, thank you for seeking that clarification. Considering that the revision on the JBC, the green book we are talking about, is technically complete, and now that we are just waiting to launch the revised JBCC contract, and also considering that there has been intensive review of particularly the dispute resolution clause, I would like you to say something about the revision, the revised JBCC contract, particularly with regard to the dispute resolution clause, because most other clauses are generally more or less the same, of course, revisions here and there, but one of the key changes in the two standard forms of contract is actually the dispute resolution clause, and there cannot be a better forum to be able to explain to these participants what we are trying to attain by making such intensive revisions in the dispute resolution clause, amongst other clauses, of course.
Okay, then thank you. I will do my best. I wasn't ready for it, but because you worked with me and a few others to get it done, anything that I may mention that may not be completely right, I'm sure you keep an eye and an ear on it, so that you can assist the members to get what is right and not what I have said. Thank you very much. So I guess I have like 25 minutes. I need not talk much about the theory of arbitration, because I'm sure I'm in the presence of very, very accomplished practitioners. And therefore, what I will just mention is that as a background is to say that Kenya is a free market economy. And when you enter into construction contract, it is a contract like any other. And the arbitration agreement in any standard form contract, or even if it is an ad hoc one, is a contract by itself. I have had on very many occasions where lawyers appear before an arbitrator and they say, or even apply for appointment of an arbitrator to a default appointing authority, and they make it a big fight about whether there is need to comply with the arbitration terms of referring a matter to arbitration, or the appointing authority's duty is merely to appoint, and then any appointed arbitrator would deal with whether he has jurisdiction or not. That has been a major problem, but we keep resolving it. The courts have pronounced themselves on it, but I need not to go there. Let me go to clause 45 of the Joint Building Council standard form contract, which is the current private sector standard form contract that is being used in the market, awaiting the introduction into the market of the Joint Building and Construction Council's 2020 edition of the same document, which the moderator has already said, is awaiting something. I believe what is being awaited for is not much. It is simply the subcontract, standard contract that would go with this revised and very revised standard contract for the construction industry.
Correct.
Without a little history, you may not know. To fully review, I'm getting lost a little, I think. To fully review the then document that was that had been in use for a very long time, since 1967, which was called the East African Institute of Architects Agreement and Schedule of Conditions of Building Contract. And in 1998, JBC, as it was then, decided that it was time to get away from that, which was a document that had largely borrowed from the JCT 1967 UK document. For those who may not remember, JCT is the Joint Contracts Tribunal of the UK, which is the governing body of the construction trade in the UK. So we did that between 1998 and 1999, and we launched this green book that is in use. And the condition, or rather the clause that deals with dispute resolution in that document is clause 45. I'll be mentioning later that you now have clause 47 when I go to the new one. And this clause 45 is what in arbitration practice, and even in law, is called a multi-tier clause. A multi-tier clause. A multi-tier clause which requires that before a party's dispute can see the right of day before an arbitrator, certain conditions must be fulfilled. I don't know whether I need to read them, but I think I'll just mention them, that when you have a dispute or a difference under this standard contract, which I must remind all of us that the dispute clause stands on its own. It's a separable contract from the rest of the contract. The other 44 clauses of the standard form contract, known as JBC 1999 edition. And even if the validity of the contract itself was to come into question, the arbitration clause would stand on its own and be able to be referred to in resolving even questions of validity of the contract based on the standard contract, or the other 44 clauses together. So that it is part of the contract terms, but it is also separable from the rest of it. So the first thing you do in this, the multi-tier clause, which I must emphasize that in law, you must fulfill each and every term that is stated in that clause for your dispute to be arbitrable. I'm sure people have heard of or have seen situations where you say your dispute is non-arbitrable, or it is non-arbitrable, or it is unarbitrable. And in terms of this clause 45, what it means is that any party who is told, either by the court or even by an appointed arbitrator, who says he would like to see whether parties complied with their own contract regarding dispute resolution, and then you are told, no, I can't have jurisdiction by the arbitrator, or the court, if you end up there, could tell you you have no jurisdiction because you did not fulfill the conditions. In this one, clause 45, it requires that when you have a dispute, you notify the other party that there is a dispute. Of course, here I will not go into the number of days, but I can just mention, once you see there is a difference that is not being resolved in accordance with the rest of the contract terms, where, for example, the architect, the QS, who have certain roles which are almost quasi-judicial in the management or administration of the contract, they are not handling properly, and you decide, or to your satisfaction, they could be doing it properly, but it is not to your satisfaction, then you are supposed to give the other party a notice and tell them, here we have a dispute because the contract administrators have not resolved certain issues under the contract that are between me and you, that is the employer and the contractor. And therefore you give a notice of 30 days. After giving that notice, you, under this clause, you must allow 90 days of trying to reach an amicable settlement. This amicable settlement is not defined in terms of the structure on how you do it under this old clause 45, but there have been parties who have decided, because the clause allows the assistance of third parties to go into mediation.
Drop sana hiyo wifi Kama kuna ingine ile more reliable. Jaribu. Ni gani? Results?
The results 2020.
Yes, Kairo.
Yes, I had lost you. I think I've got a very unstable network here.
Yeah, it seems we have lost Madenge also, at least from my end, I can't hear him.
Yes, I thought it's me who lost you.
No,
Yes,
it's Madenge. Yeah, it's QS Matenge who was talking, but he seems to have been, I don't know what happened. Mine was just a short power outage, but now I'm back.
Yes, I can hear you clearly. I'm also now back. And I left when Madenge was talking about the need to meet certain requirements. He was speaking about the 90 days. Let's hope you'll be able to get back soon. QS Madenge, you know, when you're relying on technology, there's always a challenge. I can see he's actually been dropped off.
Yes, it seems like.
Let's hope. Let's give him a minute or two, because I know he must be trying very hard to get back. I don't know whether David.
Can somebody call him on phone just to find what is going on?
Yeah, David, maybe you can call him on phone, find out what is happening.
Yes. Yeah, let me call him, and then I'll get.
Yes. Meanwhile, I'm happy to see that Engineer Karakesi has already joined us as well. Engineer, are you there?
Yes, I am. I've been here throughout.
Yes. I'll be very keen. I'm listening very carefully to what Engineer Madenge is saying, because I was trying to compare the dispute resolution clause in FIDIC, the current FIDIC 2017 Red Book, and the one in the Jbcc. And I can see there are quite some differences, and I'm hoping that we shall be able to discuss some of these procedures, particularly with the requirements.
Yeah, I'm going to cover that.
Yes.
I'll cover
in the previous, in the Green Book, in addition to meeting the requirements that Madenge is going to explain to us, parties went straight into arbitration. But obviously, I can see that now in the new dispensation of the dispute resolution clauses, there's requirement to try amicable settlement, also adjudication, engineer determination, mediation, all these things. And I'd like to believe that maybe by the end of the day, we shall have been able to enlighten the participants on some of these, the reason why it is necessary for us to go all these procedures. David Nelela, Kid Madenge.
I'm trying to reach him.
Okay.
He's still trying to connect. I propose we move on to the next speaker.
As we wait for Madenge,
as we wait for him.
Isabella, were you ready to start?
Yes, I was. If I'm allowed to, I can.
Yes, I think it is better for the sake of trying to salvage the time that we have. We can allow you to start. And then maybe when Madenge comes back, you can put a pause and you can continue. Finally, we shall consume all the information. Doesn't matter how it comes. So, karibu daktari.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh, he's back.
He's back. Oh, there's some echo. Why I think you have got two gadgets on. It sounds like you have two gadgets on. Why?
Yes, it's the internet. I have actually to have. I have to abandon my laptop. I use my phone.
Yes, please.
Sorry.
Welcome back.
Yeah. Yes. Let me disconnect. Yeah. Let me disconnect. Why? Disconnect there.
And we lost you.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It's internet. Now I have to use a phone and hold it as I talk. I don't know how to multitask. But let me try. I don't know where I left. I was sorry. I was at a point where I was saying your dispute may be declared unarbitrable or unarbitrable, I think. Yes?
Yes. On account of not having
there's a challenge. Sorry, I didn't hear you. What did you say? Yes.
We lost you at the point where you explained about the necessity for the parties to meet certain conditions in that separate clause before they go for arbitration. And you have spoken about 90 days. Yes, now you can continue from there.
Okay, yes. I was saying that if a party does not fulfill all the conditions, I think I went to the 90-day notice for amicable settlement. I'm going to move very fast so that if the network fails me again, now I'm using my phone, I can move very fast. If you go to arbitration before these 90 days are over, then you find if the other party says you have you cannot go to arbitration, and they write to the appointing authority and point out that the 90 days are not over. Any appointing authority, whether it's by default clause or whether it was intended to be the appointing authority from the beginning, they should be able to tell you that you cannot take this dispute to arbitration until you fulfill the conditions that are there, the 90 days. Now, after 90 days, then you give another notice which now asks the other party to concur in the appointment of an arbitrator. And if the other party does not agree to concur in the appointment of an arbitrator, and normally in practice, it is not stated there in the contract, but in practice, this any party suggesting or proposing a reference to arbitration will normally give some suggested names. By practice, it is normally 3, so that you ask the other party to agree in the appointment of one of those. If the other party does nothing or refuses to accept any of them or counter proposes and the other party says no, if it is not the 3 that I suggested, then we must go to the default appointing authority. You would go to, under this clause, the president of the Architectural Association of Kenya, and then spell out what your dispute is. In terms of saying you have a dispute, you had a contract, they will ask you to show that you had a contract that had an arbitration clause and that AK president was the default appointing authority. So you produce a green book if you had signed it, and then the appointing authority would take its time, because the contract in this particular document, standard for the contract, does not specify the period that the appointing authority, the default appointing authority, will appoint the arbitrator in. There have been cases where appointments have been delayed for even 2 months. This happens for different reasons, but this has been addressed. I'll mention this in the new document. And then once you have fulfilled those clauses and you have gone all the way to the AK president to appoint, they will make the appointment. Of course, that does not prevent the other party, most likely the respondent, to, as soon as you sit before the arbitrator, says that the arbitrator has no jurisdiction. I think many of you have come across this, and one of the basis of saying this will be, even they will probably say, even the AK president did not ensure that you complied with this multi-tier clause, and therefore, Mr. Arbitrator, sir or madam, you have no jurisdiction. You end up with a party, of course, making an application before the arbitrator himself, the tribunal, and saying you don't have, he has no jurisdiction, and then goes on to prove why the party is saying there was no compliance with the multi-tier clause in terms of the conditions that must be met before a dispute becomes arbitrable. In some cases, the matter even goes to court, where the arbitrator says he has jurisdiction, but the opposing party says, Mr. Arbitrator, sir, I'm off to court to challenge your jurisdiction. The courts, of course, have ruled in this. And as a lawyer, you remember I said I'm a practicing advocate. It would be remiss of me if I don't point out 1 or 2 famous cases that are recent, and which the non-compliance with the multi-tier clause of this specific Green Book document, the JBC Standard Contract 1999 edition, the courts were able to pronounce themselves and say, yes, the arbitrator had no jurisdiction because clause 45, which is a contract between the parties, just like the other terms of the contract, was not complied with, and therefore, Mr. Arbitrator, sir, you cannot continue with the matter because you have not. I'll mention the 2 clauses. One of them, 2 for different reasons. One of them is National Bank of Kenya Limited. Let me start with the one that is directly in terms of an arbitrator being declared to have no jurisdiction. One of them, which is a recent case, 2019, is Sonile Holdings Limited versus Vinayak Builders Limited, and an interested party called Simon Sairi Malonza, who was the arbitrator being challenged for lack of jurisdiction. And the court in this case found that the arbitrator had no jurisdiction because the notice periods, particularly the 90-day period for amicable settlement, had not been complied with. Of course, for those who are lawyers, you can imagine there will be a loud shout about access to justice and all the others because it's a constitutional guarantee at Article 50 of the Constitution, and there is no way you can say you cannot arbitrate this, and yet we are here for justice, which is safeguarded under the Constitution. The courts have refused to listen to those stories, and they have decided if parties are bound by their contract terms, and having chosen arbitration as their forum for resolving their disputes, they must comply with those terms. And indeed, that is in other words to say, you cannot require a party to comply with the other 44 of the Jbcc standard contract, but you now say for the dispute situational safeguard in terms of access case, that arbitrator was removed. That is 2019. There is another older case, which is the National Bank of Kenya Limited, was as Piplastic Samcolit. I hope I'm able to pronounce this word. Piplastic Samcolit Kenya Limited, at another 202, East Africa, page 503. In this case, it is a contractor who had gone to court. I happen to know the contractor, incidentally. And the court was able to say, you did not comply with clause 45, and you rushed to court without having complied with your contract terms. And the arbitration clause is a contract term that binds you just like any other freely arrived at contract, Kenya being a free market economy that respects the freedom of parties and terms of contract. I hope I'm not running out of time, having listed Mr. Moderator Sir, having spent time trying to get back. Am I very far from my time?
Okay, I would request you to try and kind of condense a little bit, but you are coming out very, very clearly, and you are now giving us the two cases.
Yes.
Maybe you can try to up a little bit for the sake
Yes,
of time.
I'll actually stop there because I've cited the cases. I'm sure everyone can go and check up those cases. They are very useful because every day we are fighting that challenge on the jurisdiction of an arbitrator. And people keep saying, you can't deny me justice and the other things. So I think I'll now go to the new standard contract, which I was not ready for, but because the moderator directed that I deal with it, as a QS is my senior, so I will have to comply and try and do justice to that before I go to anything else. In terms of dispute, in terms of dispute resolution, this is a more improved, enhanced clause, which is now clause 47. Other than just seeking amicable settlement within the 90 days that I have mentioned about, there is now, the new document has introduced adjudication specifically, so that I'm sure you all know that the purpose of even the 90-day amicable settlement is to ensure that only real legitimate disputes end up being resolved where parties spend a lot of time and money before an arbitral tribunal. So that now, to enhance that, the new conditions have the Jbcc 2020, I think it's December 2020 or edition, have introduced adjudication long before you go for any arbitration. There is a period stated there at clause 47, so that you will not go to adjudication except in very special circumstances, like what I'll mention as emergency or expedited arbitration, before your dispute has been referred to an adjudicator who must deal with your issue within 30 days and give a pronouncement within those 30 days. Can extend the time to for a maximum of 15 days as long as the referring party, meaning the party who sought tension, so that once that decision is rendered, it has its time span, which you must live with unless you issue a dissatisfaction notice saying you are dissatisfied within a certain period. I believe it is 14 days, that you are dissatisfied. So then under this new contract, Jbcc contract, you are bound by the decision of the adjudicator and you will never go to arbitration. You can go somewhere else to resolve your dispute, where if you go to court, I'm sure the court will ask you why you are there if you have failed to comply with your contract terms. In addition to adjudication, the new document has introduced mediation for a short period, I think it's also 14 days, within which one party may suggest or recommend mediation for the dispute it says it has, and the other party may agree. And if the parties agree, they can go into mediation, a formal mediation. This mediation will not take forever. It has been given a specific period. It's also 14 days, so that if the mediation succeeds, then there is no need to proceed to another dispute resolution forum. But if the mediation fails, then you can go to normal arbitration, where you now have to comply with the multi-tier clause, which is clause 47 in the new document, and observe what is required before you can go all the way to seeking an appointment by a default appointing authority where parties have not agreed on an arbitrator. That is normal mediation. But there are some disputes that may require quick resolution, where in the new document, there is arbitration. This expedited arbitration is a mother standard reform contracts around the world. I must mention here that I'm familiar with very many, because in my master's in construction, one of the things I did at the UK is to study very many of those standard form contracts. You find some of them calling them emergency arbitration, but here we have opted to call them expedited arbitration. And this expedited arbitration has a short period, and it is on matters that cannot wait the completion of the project or abandonment or termination. For example, where I'll give only one example, where you need to replace a contract administrator. Let's say in this case, it is the architect or the QS. Since there are certain sanctions, or there are certain negative consequences of you not having an architect or whoever is administering the contract doing so under this building contract, that is taken as one of the issues or disputes where the employer removes, because he can do that, they have a separate contract with the architect or even the other contract administrators, he can remove them. The project needs to go on. I think I'll mention it a few minutes later that there is something peculiar about construction as a construction contract, that you need to have those the administrator, there's the architect. That is taken straight to arbitration, because you remember an adjudicator's decision is not binding if one party has given a notice of dissatisfaction with the adjudicator's decision, so that then you'd have a situation where there is a hanging matter to be dealt with in arbitration, which may take a long time. So in this case, for those areas where disputes where you need to have decisions in order to move forward very quickly, there is that expedited mediation. So that, like for the architect, you will have to go to expedited arbitration. It comes about because you may appoint, or the employer may appoint an architect who the contractor is opposed to, and then, or the employer refuses to appoint an architect. You will be surprised, but certain very big cases are around with us, where the employer removes the consultants, the project consultants, but refuses to appoint replacements, and that becomes a dispute. So there are such instances where you may require expedited arbitration. The rest of the stuff is to go through the steps I've talked about: adjudication, mediation. And I already mentioned that during the mediation, the arbitration period is suspended. The notice for arbitration is suspended in this new document, so that for the period you are dealing with mediation, which I'm sure all of us know, mediation only results in an agreement that parties have to sign, and then they would have to seek its enforcement once they agree. That period of mediation renders the arbitration notice, any arbitration notice, suspended until parties come up with success or without success. The rest is no more arbitration, like I have said. I know the theme of this webinar, if I have not forgotten what Mr. Wambua briefed me, is that effective dispute resolution in the construction sector. So I must address that very quickly because that is the main thing. Let me mention, like I said, that the construction industry is a peculiar one when it comes to construction contracts. Remember, construction is not a factory, but it has elements of a factory in it. It is not a normal business trade.
Umeanguka hiyo nini ya?
It is their contracts where certain players called administrators
We are losing you partly. Why we've lost you?
A significant role of giving effect to the parties' terms. It also has other players like subcontractors, nominated subcontractors, domestic subcontractors, or even nominated suppliers who also play a very, very important role.
You have lost you.
Let's see. Now, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. You are back. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I was saying, because the theme, according to the brief I got, is effective dispute resolution in the construction sector. I'll quickly, before I run out of internet again, just mention a few things that probably need to be done in order to ensure that there is effective dispute resolution in arbitration. I think the first point is...
but very quickly, please. We are running out of time.
Yes, one of the things to do is establishment of a legal framework that makes arbitration, or no, ADR, other methods of ADR dispute resolution are part of our statutes. For example, we have just mentioned that we have got adjudication in the new Jbcc Green Book. But remember, unlike a place like the UK, we do not have a law that makes it mandatory for parties to refer dispute to adjudication before they go to arbitration. And you know, we have just mentioned the advantages of adjudication. The dispute gets distilled to such an extent that you only go to arbitration for a real legitimate dispute. So in this case, we would require, and this is something we should be lobbying for, to have ADR enshrined in our statutes, by having Parliament pass a law that, for example, like may reflect like what we have in the UK. In the UK, if your contract does not have an adjudication clause, there is something called construction contract rules. These construction rules make, I'm forgetting the actual words. If I remember, I'll mention them before we go. Make it mandatory that if you do not have an adjudication clause, the law will put one into your contract, so that if you have a dispute, you must go to arbitration before you go to either what they have there as the technology and construction courts to deal with your dispute, or arbitration, which is a choice you make. You won't go to either of those forums to seek justice if you have not gone to adjudication first. I also suggest that the government of Kenya, being a very major stakeholder in the construction industry, adopts what we have just come up in the private sector, which is the new Jbcc document that enshrines all those things I have mentioned about the new standard Jbcc contract. That would make it very easy for even public sector projects, which end up also having a big element of private sector, because the government contracts with private contractors. And therefore, we should be able to have many disputes in the public sector, also refer to adjudication before you, and mediation before you go to arbitration. We should also have, both in the private sector and private sector, if you choose an ad hoc arbitration clause, to always remember to have expedited arbitration or reference to arbitration, so that there isn't a lot of time spent, much to the loss of the industry, in dealing with the disputes that are not real disputes, or those that are emergency being taken like ordinary arbitrations. The other thing I would suggest, it is known, but it keeps being forgotten, is the appointing authorities. The appointing authorities, and I can say this without fear of contradiction, have at times been guilty of appointing persons who do not have the requisite competence to deal with specific specialized disputes. I can give a quick example. You will find an arbitrator giving certain orders during an arbitration that may actually, in terms of construction, be impossible to give effects to. By the time you come to resolve that issue, people have gone to court to ask about the operational ability of how you can give effect to such orders, because the person who gave the orders does not know what you mean. I'll give a quick example in a case, some big cases. One of them is still ended a few years back, where you have an arbitrator who gives orders saying, you have had several contracts between you and the other party, and we have a dispute between you as the contractor, and now that you have declared a dispute, we are also declaring a dispute in terms of, for example, you are nearly finishing the project. You are probably almost getting to practical completion. The employer says, now, I want a full remeasurement of these works because you have taken me to arbitration on another issue. Of course, you remember you have to satisfy the clause 47 now, not 45, a requirement for you to refer this. Yes, yes.
Okay, I know this is a very passionate topic. We are running out of time. It's 1:15. What I'd like you to request you is to sum up. Then I would like all the participants, if you have any questions. Obviously, these are very topical issues, and you've actually been able to articulate them very, very well. And I know there must be a lot of questions the participants are asking. But for the sake of time, I'll give you 1 minute to wind up, and then we can go to the next presenter, because we must be through by 4. It's now 20 past.
Okay, so I'll just wind up by addressing the appointing authorities. I was getting there to appoint competent people, giving due regard to their competencies, not just an arbitrator because he's on the panel. whether it is NCIA, whether it is Chartered Institute, or whether it is the other one. There have also been rules, Your Honor, Mr. Moderator, where you have, like, we have some new rules that have come where there is, like, Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, a rule that has really created havoc in terms of dispute consolidation. You have 5 disputes or 4 disputes, and just because you have gone with your 5 disputes, the other party says they also have disputes, and the tribunal comes and says, because I'm allowed to consolidate, even if you do not agree, the tribunal itself gives itself a new mandate, a new jurisdiction, and adds the other 5. And yet, the only person who went to arbitration is the claimant. Now you introduce other things, you end up having a lot of preliminary objections, a lot of other applications, and therefore for this one, I'll leave by saying that the appointing authorities should be very, very careful on who they appoint in terms of competence. We don't appoint people just because we think they are good. They must really know the area of the dispute. I think I would have to stop there. I had a lot of points I could have added, but I can see we are running out of time. And then I can take 1 or 2 questions if the moderator allows.
Let us.
And I'm still holding a phone.
Yes, I don't know what you're going to do, but maybe we can allow other presenters to quickly present, then we can take all the questions together. Is that okay?
Yeah,
thank you very much. That was a very, very good and very emotive topic. Now, this is a good opportunity for me to invite Dr. Towe. Dr. Towe, tell us about the current trends and nature of disputes in the construction industry.
Thank you, moderator. QS Mathenge has covered a lot of the things that I would have wanted to cover. I would like to share my screen. I think being a teacher, I'm used to having some PowerPoint. I hope I'm enabled. The host has disabled me.
Wambua, can you enable Daktari to share the screen?
Moderator, they've actually enabled you.
And
You are now the host.
And I'll give you 15 minutes.
They have enabled who?
The moderator.
But moderator is the survey. I don't know how I'll do it.
Okay, just a moment.
Just allow Isabella to display.
Yeah, I hope I'll take less than the allotted time, because most of what I have has really been covered by QS Mathenge. I hope, am I enabled now? And thank you, Bwana Wambua, for the kind introduction.
Wambua, are you able to do it? I don't know how to do it from this side. I can, yes, now, yes.
Yeah, okay, yes, so I don't know if you can see my screen.
We can see it very clearly. Thank you.
Yeah, so, okay, so you can see it clearly?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, thank you. So, Lydie, I was requested to cover the current trends and the nature of construction disputes. So I'll go rather fast. So that is how we dispute. You can see these gentlemen are trying to dispute. So before I get into the meat of it, I wanted to really talk about what a dispute is. A dispute is a disagreement, an argument, a controversy, or a claim. But from construction perspective, basically is where the contract agreement provides obligation for each party, so that when one party does not fulfill those obligations, then a dispute then arises, among other things. So basically it stems out of legally binding agreement between the parties. So just these ones Mathenge has covered, so I will not belabor them, the various kinds of dispute resolution methods that are available. Bwana Moderator, the one I usually ascribe to and the one that I suggest, the one that I really suggest that most people, or most of, at least when I'm teaching my students, the one that I usually suggest is the prevention. I think we talk a lot about dispute resolution and very little about prevention. And I think that is squarely in the mandate of the consultants, who are the people we are addressing here. So they are also, Madenge has also talked about most of this, about the various ADR methods that are available in construction. So I'm trying to move on, not to repeat the things that have already been said. Now, what then are the current trends? I thought that a good indicator of the current trends of construction disputes in Kenya would be to get data from the various appointing authorities who are listed there, and see what do the trends say. And this is what the trends say. So I drew this graph to indicate the number of cases, the number of requests for referral to arbitration. And you can see it has been on an upward trend. I got the data from 2017 up to 2021. So we could say that the current trend then is that the number of disputes that are in construction are increasing. And therefore, I believe that the ADR methods that we have will continue to play a key role in making sure that these disputes are dealt with in the best possible way. Now, I want to look at the nature of disputes. Nature of disputes belongs on actually stemming from the obligations that all the parties have. So there are those that are related to the obligations that an employer has, or the owner. So for example, there are some that are implied, that they will not hinder the contractor from performing work. So you find that there are cases that are coming that the contractor was hindered from performing their own obligations under the contract by the employer for many reasons, which probably now we are not able to cover all of them. But at least I believe that since most of us are in construction, we know what that is about. Then non-cooperation. It is a requirement that the employer will cooperate with the contractor, so that to enable or to enhance the way that the contractor does their work. For example, where the permits are not available so that the work cannot be continued, or the various approvals, or where, as Madenge had said, they don't appoint, either they don't appoint consultants, or they remove the current consultants and they don't appoint replacement, or late nomination of the subcontractors. All these amount to non-cooperation because they do not enhance the way that a contractor then works. Then there are those that are express obligations, which we all know, where the owner delays or does not pay. That has become a very big deal in construction, obviously. Or failure to grant possession of the site. So these are obligations. We know that these are obligations that are given already to the employer. So when they don't then give the whole site or even part of the site, then it becomes an issue of dispute. Or failure to ensure work. If the requirement of the contract is that the owner will ensure a part of the work, if they don't do that, then that becomes an issue. The next obligation that they have is contract administration, where they hinder the performance of consultants. Sometimes you find where the employers are the ones that are kind of telling the consultants what to do and to do the wrong thing. So they hinder the efficient performance of the consultants. Either they tell them, don't pay, I don't have money now, so delay the payment, that kind of thing. And then also not ensuring that consultants perform professionally. Because it is the employers that appoint the consultants, they are obliged to make sure they have the right skills to perform professionally as far as the project is concerned. Then there are also many issues of unlawful termination, where the employer terminates without following the rules as the contract then provides, or even terminates just because they think they can and they are not well advised. The other areas of dispute are site conditions. We all know that site conditions can be very contentious. So there are implied warranties that when you provide information to the contractor, at least it is information that is useful, information that is correct, or misrepresentation of that information, where the employer has information about site conditions and they do not give it to the contractor. The other lot of is design errors. We know that the design and the contract documents, it is the obligation of the employer. I hear somebody else speaking.
No, continue.
Yeah, it is the obligation of the employer to make sure that the design and contract documents are done well. So where there are errors, there are delays, there are inadequacies, the validity of the site instructions are being questioned, there is disputed measurements, the variations become very contentious, or even the documents are ambiguous. Whether it is the drawings or the contract documents, then that has become a very big area of disputing. The others are, for example, where an employer has unrealistic expectations. Sometimes an employer will get into a job and they don't know what is the role, for example, of a QS. So they have unrealistic expectations, or even of the contractor and so on. So that then, since they are expectations are different from what is happening on the project, then that becomes an area of dispute. Or where there is slow progress by the contractor, issues of acceleration of work. Is it expensive? Who should pay for it? Who ordered the acceleration of work? Or issues of abandoning site by contractors, and of course, the termination of the works. But the other very critical party is the contractor. So there are some disputes that come out from the practice of the contractor. Some of these, and the most important ones, there are many, but one of the most important one is the standard of work. Does the contractor have the technical capacity to perform? What is the level of their workmanship? What is the standard of materials that they have? Are they testing them? Are they getting the proper approvals? How suitable are those materials for that particular kind of construction? The other one that is very related to the standard of work is where a contractor underprices and such that they are not able to then perform the work in accordance with the specifications and with the requirements. The other one for contractors is statutory obligations. We all know there are very many statutory obligations that contractors have, or the site has, either because of acts of parliament or other legislations or regulations, whether it's from NCA or from the other various players in our industry. Sometimes the contractor is unable to meet those statutory obligations, and therefore the employer is sued, and the contractor must then indemnify the employer, and those becomes very disputed matters. Other matters are coordination and management. How do you control the persons on site? How do you exclude the persons on site? How do you deal with antiquities and fossils? So that those becomes matters that are under the contractor, but they can be sources of disputes. The other one, obviously, as we all know, I hope I'm not rushing too much. I'm trying to.
No. So
okay.
far, so good. We can read and I'm going to share this.
Okay, the issue of materials. So when you have a construction, the materials that are incorporated into the building, for example, if you have termination, who do they belong to? Do they belong to the employer? The materials on site, who do they belong to? Maybe when the contractor knew you were about to terminate them, they came and carried all the materials, probably other equipment and other things, and they become quite contentious. Then there is also the issue of fluctuations. We all know that fluctuations, there are lots of arguments about what was the base date. Sometimes I've even seen contentions or disputes about the method of calculation. Then completion. Time is of essence in construction. Some of the biggest disputes that we have, and the most frequent, are about time. Was there a delay in the progress of work? How was the extension of time given? Was it valid? Were the conditions precedent to it met? What was the requirement? So the matters of time, and because time is of essence in construction, then become matters that there are lots of dispute. Other disputes that are related to the contractor are variations. I believe that all of us know what variations are, so we will not define them. But variations, whether it is additions, whether it is omissions, alterations, whether it is day works, how do you deal with them? So sometimes there is a lot of contention where the contractors feel that the consultants have not dealt with them as they would like or in accordance with the contract. And that then becomes then a matter of dispute. Another very big issue in contractors' disputes, or most of the disputes that contractors bring up, are matters of payment. We all know that there are lots and lots of arguments and disputes about payment, whether it is because there was non-payment, and more so when there is delay in payment, because sometimes the employer does not meet the time that is allowed in the contract. Sometimes also they are disputing because there is undervaluation, where they think that they were entitled to a certificate that reflected more work than it actually did. That then leads to issues to do with the interest for the delays. What is the appropriate interest, particularly where the contract does not specify what the interest will be? Then it becomes a matter of contention. How do you pay for the financing costs? Because once there is delay in payments or non-payments, then the contractor gets into other financing costs, because ideally they will have to get money elsewhere to be able to finance the project. And then, of course, fluctuation of foreign currency. This is because in our industry, there are very many things that we import, whether they are lifts, whether they are other components that we use. When the dollar keeps fluctuating like it has been in the recent past, then how do you deal with that? And which rate do you use? The central bank rate, the bank of the contractor, the bank of the employer? Sometimes these things are not very clear in the contract documents. Others that are related to the contractor is where there is financial failure of the contractor. Sometimes the contractor simply has no financial muscle to carry out the project, and it becomes a dispute, okay? So that they cannot keep running the project, even if the payments are coming in a timely way. They still have issues with financing the whole production process of the project. Sometimes there are also issues to do with changes in law, where the law changes when the contract is running. How do you then deal with it? How do you then address those issues? And of course, then there is the termination of the contract. You know, in our contracts, contractors are also allowed to terminate. The other very common disputes from the contractor side are basically about loss and expense, where the contractors argue that they have actually got losses that cannot be directly addressed or compensated using the terms of the contract. And so they want to go beyond ex gratia payments and that kind of thing. Other matters that are not necessarily belonging to any party, but could come from either side, but have disputes in construction, are lack of teamwork. When you go to, construction is teamwork. When the team is not working well, then there is a lot of disputes that would ideally not work, would not be there if they were working together. And when you investigate, you find that it is just that they are not talking to each other sometimes, or they are not discussing, or they are not sharing information, and so on. Then there is also poor communication. This is very serious in construction. There are lots and lots of disputes that would be ably addressed if there was proper and good communication among the parties. Then, of course, there is forced merger, which we all know about, or delays by third parties, where there is another third party who is playing a key or significant role in the project. And when they do not do their part, then you find that then the team, whether it is from the employer side or the contractors, things just don't work very well. So, moderator, that is all I had to say. I'm sorry I have rushed so much, but I was just reminding people of the things that we all know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. If it was possible, we would have given you a standing ovation. You've given us a fantastic overview of the trend and nature of disputes. And those of us who are in practice, I'm sure can attest that everything you have said is indeed actually what is happening in the industry now. There will be no time for participants to raise any questions, but I can request them to put them in paper. And I believe they can also be able to reach out to you just in case there's an area that they want some clarity.
Thank you.
Is there going to be a way of us getting this PowerPoint that you presented? You know, some of the participants could also be students who want to be able to learn more.
I can
I don't know,
email
maybe you
it.
can.
I will email it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. This is now a good opportunity for me to invite Engineer Karakesi. Engineer Karakesi, we have about 40 minutes. I'll also give you, to be fair to you, I'll give you 15 minutes. Then probably shall have the last 5 minutes to be able to come up with any questions.
Very well.
Dr. Karakesi.
Thanks. I would like to share my screen. I'd like to share my screen. Can somebody assist me?
Super. David, can you also enable engineer to share the screen?
Yeah, sure. Just a moment.
Thank you. So far, so good. You are doing very well. You can see you very clearly now.
Very well. So let me get started. If you look at the title of the presentation, I have included these dispute boards in bracket, because generally people don't seem to differentiate between the adjudication, which QS Madenge talked about, and the current best practice, as I understand it. Now, what is a dispute board? So a dispute board is a board of impartial professionals from the beginning of the project to follow construction progress, encourage dispute avoidance, and assist in the resolution of disputes for the duration of the project. Dr. just mentioned, when she was looking at the different dispute resolution mechanism, he said one of her best is avoidance. But in fact, avoidance is very key when it comes to adjudication. So maybe before I proceed to the different types of dispute boards, let me address the issue of adjudication first. So you have got the adjudication, which has got a piece of legislation behind it. Say we have in the UK, in New Zealand, Australia, and so on, which is basically a creature of statute. Then you have adjudication, which is a creature of contract, like we have in the draft Jbcc, where people get together and say we're going to have adjudication. And those ones are known as ad hoc adjudications, because they only come into play when a dispute is arisen. But when it comes to the dispute board, it's got a totally different function. Its main function is to help parties avoid disputes. Now, why have we gone down this route of dispute board? It's because of the huge cost that dispute cost. If you remember, Mr. Wiruri mentioned that over the last few years that they've been in existence, they are looking at, I think he mentioned $7 billion worth of dispute, something close to that, yeah? So you can imagine the number of hours spent by lawyers putting the cases together. Yeah, they are arbitrators themselves and so on. In fact, there is based on some data that we saw from Australia, the cost of disputes in some cases can represent up to 10% of the construction cost. So it's a huge cost. So that's why over time it became obvious that we need to find ways of avoiding disputes, as opposed to saying, or let's put a mechanism for resolving them. It is too late. So it actually started back in the UK, where they've got what they call dispute review boards. These ones provide non-binding opinions, but because the parties tend to choose people who are experienced, who know what they're doing, they tend to listen to them until it never goes beyond the DRB. That was then there's what they call Dispute Adjudication Board, which you found was found in the old version of FIDIC, the 1999. In the recent one, the 2017, we talk about dispute avoidance and adjudication board. So these ones here give binding decisions, and parties can request informal assistance as a way of dispute avoidance. Then you got the DB, which is again is a creature of the World Bank. Instead of calling it a DAB, they call it DB. ICC has got what they call a combined dispute board. So you start off as like a DRB, which then becomes a DAB to give a binding decision if the non-binding opinion is not accepted by the parties, or they call it actual recommendation here. And then you've got a thing called dispute resolution expert. These are just different names, but they basically do the same thing. Now, you can see the history of how it was developed. Back in 1975 in the US, there was a big dispute on one of the tunnels, which had been constructed a couple of years before. The disputes were relating to a lot of delays and the cost overrun. So they go together and put together this DRB consisting of 3 people for the next tunnel, and it seemed to work quite well. The World Bank picked it up on that and introduced a DRB as mandatory for projects over $50 million. Then DRBF established and FIDIC adopted the optional amendment to the Red Book for a DAB. Then there was the FIDIC Suite of 1999, which I just mentioned. The World Bank also produced theirs in 2000 as a DRB, but later on changed it to a DAB. So today, what we have, if I may use the FIDIC conditions of the 2017 edition, so that is the Red Book, Silver Book, and Yellow Book, the dispute resolution mechanism is identical in all the 3 books. But before I do that, where are they used? So you can see what I've shown in red, all the countries which have adopted the DBs as part of the dispute resolution mechanism. And they are used for many projects: airports, bridges, ports, power plant, underground work, and so on. But what do they have in common? Okay, all these projects here, they tend to be lengthy duration. They tend to be complex sites and construction method. I mean, the presentation we've just had, relates to the complexity of projects. So they are complex. Okay, the construction methods can be an issue, and therefore they tend to be high risk. So I talked about the issue of adjudication being ad hoc or standing, so being ad hoc. But when it comes to dispute boards, they can be ad hoc or standing. Now, what do I mean by ad hoc? Ad hoc is when the board is constituted after a dispute has materialized. And that's what you found under 1999 FIDIC Yellow and Silver Book. The Red Book was a standing board, which means that the board had to be formed at the beginning of the project. So it is not, ad hoc boards are no longer recommended. The standing boards are formed at the commencement of the contract. The board members go to site, they take site visits and meetings every 100 days or so. They've got a very important dispute avoidance role, because when they go to site, they see what is going on, they're able to engage the parties to discuss and be able to encourage them to ask for informal opinions, which generally tend to be accepted by the parties, and disputes are therefore avoided. So what are the essential characteristics of a dispute board? They must be independent. They must be impartial. Proactive, I've just mentioned. So you don't see a problem during a site visit and keep quiet about it. You ask gently, we were here 100 days ago, 3 months ago. This particular section of the road has not progressed. What could be the problem? So people start talking. Very judicial, okay? And therefore, experience and or knowledge in the type of work is mandatory. And of course, I cannot understate the requirement to understand the language of the contract. So if I just take clause 21 of either the yellow, silver, or blue or red book, and look at the way the mechanism works. So you constitute the DAB within 28 days of the letter of award. If a DAB is not appointed within this period, for whatever reason, say one party doesn't do what they're supposed to do, then there's always an appointing entity or official named in the contract. So the other thing is that with avoidance of dispute, both parties can request assistance and or informal decision, but they should do it jointly, not separately. So also a DAB can request parties to make a joint request, as I mentioned previously. If you're seeing a problem that people are kind of, avoiding to discuss, you can engage them during site visits and site meetings, saying, let's talk about this. Do you guys need assistance? What is the problem? Look, you're most welcome to ask us to give you our own informal opinion. So you obtain a DAB decision when there is a reference of a dispute to the DAB, but it should be submitted within 42 days after the engineer's determination. If not, then it becomes null and void. So it's a way of trying to make sure that, first of all, issues are dealt with quickly. But if there's no notice of the satisfaction of the engineer's determination, then it becomes final and binding. The DAB decision is within 84 days, or such other period as may be proposed by DAB and agreed by the parties. The notice of the satisfaction of the DAB decision must be issued within 28 days. If it is not, then the decision becomes final and binding. Now, one thing I need to mention here, any decision of the DAB is binding. Even in the new Jbcc, that's what it says, it is binding. But it only becomes final if there is no notice of dissatisfaction within a given period. Once a determination has been made or decision has been made, there is a cooling off period which allows the parties to enter into some amicable settlement. And it could be a mediation process, but it's not mandatory. So arbitration can commence after 28 days, whether or not amicable settlement has taken place. Then there is the issue of arbitration, which is the next, shall we say, the last year of the dispute resolution process. So if there are two types of arbitration, one is where there is a binding decision by the DAB. It's not final, it's binding, but the party that's supposed to pay refuses to pay. You then go to arbitration only for the purpose of enforcement. You don't argue the issues. Okay, the issues can be discussed later. So the whole idea is this: you want to make sure that the cash flow of the project is maintained, because the objective of both parties should be to deliver the project, hopefully within cost, on time, right quality. So when there is a dispute which might affect the cash flow of the contractor, that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible. So if there's no DAB in place for whatever reason, then you can proceed straight to arbitration. And this time you go there to discuss the merits of the case. Now, lastly, I hope I'm not going too fast. Lastly,
okay, so fast, good.
Yeah, are DBs effective? Now, remember, the DB process is confidential. But you can get, if I don't know, many of us who sit on DBs, we tend to talk with members of, say, the RBF. Actually, I happen to be the country representative of the RBF. So I get a lot of data from my fellow DB members. And you can tell what is going on in the industry. So of the 512 decisions which we looked at not long ago, only 32 were referred to arbitration. And only 7 of these were overturned in the process. Generally, the bulk of DB decisions are accepted. And the success rate in terms of avoiding disputes is about 94%. So in other words, when you give them the non-binding opinion, they generally take it on board. Maybe only in 6% of the cases do they ask for even a determination or proceed to arbitration. So again, about nearly 70% of all decisions referred to arbitration were eventually upheld, confirming that the method is as good as the more established methodologies. Mr. Moderator, I think I'll stop there, and I hope I've managed to
very much.
my time.
Now, thank you very much. And I'm hoping that QS Madenge and Dr. Towe are still with us. We can now see the convergence point. And as I thank Mr. Karakesi, Engineer Karakesi, I would like to ask QS Madenge and Dr. Towe, how soon do they think that DBs are likely to be introduced in the billing contracts? I know, FIDIC is mainly used in big civil engineering projects, but for the billing contracts, even in a place like maybe even the UK, South Africa, the standard forms of contract, many of them do not seem to have gaps. And yet, from the presentation made by engineer, they seem to be quite effective in what we call in prevention. And we always say prevention is better than cure. Can I get a comment or two from Madenge, then from Daktari, and perhaps from a participant? Then we can decide on how we want to proceed. It's just about 4, but I'm sure we can spare a few minutes for this. Karibu Daktari or QS Madenge.
On? Can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you, QS Madenge. Very briefly, just
my internet is, I can just quickly say that, yes, Mr. Moderator, you have observed that in many places we do not have dispute review boards or DABs or Jbcc and the others in contracts. But of course, this is because of key contracts. Many of them building contracts are local contracts. But even when they are not local, the engineering sector has very large projects such that they are
losing you.
They are very, very sensitive to go and make public who has made it very keen on avoiding this. But for the building industry, this can also be used.
You seem to be losing your QS. Okay, maybe as wait for Moi to come back. I would like to hear engineers, Daktari's opinion.
Yeah, thank you.
Proceed, engineer.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please, Daktari.
Yeah, thank you, Bwana Moderator. I think in my presentation, I said that one of the tools that we do not use much in construction is prevention. I think as a tool of prevention of dispute and dispute escalation, DABs would be a very ideal tool. And then
lost you. Daktari, we lost you. Sorry, Daktari, I seem to have lost you.
Madam Moderator, can I add something regarding the FIDIC forms? There is a new form called the Green Book, which is intended to be used for projects. Green Book, yes.
Yes.
It is used for projects worth anything from about, say, generally below $3 million. Okay. So, and it's a very simplified form, but they do have DABs. So if you get a chance to look at the Green Book, it's relevant to the construction industry. I'm talking, sorry, the building industry,
So, sorry, moderator, I had a power outage shortly, but I'm back. I was saying that as a means of dispute prevention, I think DABs would work very well even in the building industry. And so personally, from my own experience, I would really encourage them to be used. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we said that everlasting summons do not have to last forever. It is now 4:01.
Yes.
We have truly enjoyed the presentation. And Engineer Karakesi, I don't know whether you'll be able to circulate the PowerPoint presentations that you had, just like you requested, Daktari, because they're extremely important as reference point response in future. Why we lost at one point, but maybe I can give you 1 minute to conclude. Daktari has just told us that should encourage of DBs, even in the local construction. Also, engineer has told us that there is a new green book, which is actually now specifically FIDIC green book, which is specifically for building contract. And maybe we can actually go through it and see. Because you know the development of standard forms is not static. And whenever there's something good that comes along, when we review them, we should see whether there is a possibility that this idea of, or concept of DBs can be incorporated in future. Last comment, Moi, just one, then we conclude.
Yeah, I only mentioned that what I had forgotten to mention in the UK in terms of adjudication being enshrined in their law statute is the scheme for construction contracts that makes it mandatory that you have adjudication, whether or not you have put it in your contract. For what we have just finished regarding dispute review board, of course, construction contracts, they're dealing with buildings, some of them are taken not to be able to afford what you can call a semi-permanent dispute review board, for example, moving along the project. And of course, there is a lot of sometimes call it suspicion in this country when you have already known members of a dispute review board dealing with a dispute impartially. The requirement for we considered this, remember, when we are dealing with our own clause and said, let us wait a bit. Yes, but that is for larger projects, not for the smaller projects, not for the small projects.
Thank you.
Are you still on? Can you still hear me?
Yes, I'm on, but I really want us to.
Yeah, the only thing now is to.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I'll just mention that both clause 45 of the old JBC and the new Jbcc clause 47, the intention in having those multi-tier clauses is to avoid parties going to arbitration, for example, just to as revenge disputes or counter disputes instead of what parties call counter claims, but they end up fighting for counter disputes, so that a party will not be saying they have a dispute that the other party did not know until it went and filed for its own dispute. That is the intention of those clauses, and we are happy that the courts have really been enforcing those clauses. 45 has been enforced for a very long time now, over 20 years. And wherever there is a dispute and you run to say you also have your own dispute without having followed the requirements of the multi-tier clause, parties have failed to rewrite contracts for parties, binding agreements and a contract just like the rest of the contract. So I think I don't have to add anything beyond that.
Thank you very much. I think at this juncture, I'd like to call, before I hand back to Bwana Wambua, I'd like to call upon all the participants to thank or to give a standing ovation in quotes, to the panelists. Today we've heard from the experts, and I'm sure all of us have something to take home that will make us better professionals. You see, even when engineer was speaking, he spoke about best practice. Gary spoken about best practice. QS Madenga has spoken about best practice. I think the purpose of such forums is to continuously improve, because sometimes it is only when you listen to some panelists or some people, like now we listen to Daktari, we listen to QS Mwai, we listen to engineer, that you realize how much there is for you to learn. And I'd like to encourage NCIA and AK to make sure that we have many such forums in future. With those few remarks, I would like us to now to hand it back to Wambua to tell us how to conclude, whether he wants us to conclude with a prayer or a drink or we toast. Wambua, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bwana Moderator, for that very insightful moderation, and we really appreciate. And we also want to thank the panelists. I want to thank our colleagues at AAK, my colleagues here at NCIA, and also for all the participants for your patience. We really appreciate you, and I look forward to having you participate in our future webinars. Unless my boss has anything to add. See you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bwana
And I
Kairo.
can see many participants have requested for the recording, and I hope that you'll be able to facilitate for the recording to be sent to the participants. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We look forward to further collaboration.
Thank you.
Thank you.